ek het nie 'n probleem nie. Okay, let's try that. So where was it? So that number actually includes all these interruptions as this good example. But this gives you an actual number that you can move. So if we look at iteration 3, we are fairly certain that we should be able to get to about a 40-point deliverable in iteration 3. So we can take the next items, the top priority items off of our backlog that adds up to about 40, and then schedule them for iteration 3 and have a fairly good idea that we'll be able to complete it. Does that make sense? So that's your basic Scrum and Agile approaches. Yeah, so then what we do is we'll take these guys, and I'm just going to show planning. We'll take the items and we'll start scheduling them into iterations. So, yeah. And how that works is general backlog grooming. The top priority items are sitting on the top of the backlog, so we'll, as a team, will be able to evaluate what we are wanting to do. And these are the important ones. We'll have a look at them and say, okay, there's enough information for us to actually deliver something. So then we can simply take them and schedule them for our next sprint or iteration. Once we've done that, if we go and have a look at our sprint, this is now our sprint backlog. So these are the items that is on the backlog for this sprint. And this is what the developers would actually work on. So the developers look at this. They'll take these items, break them down into tasks, and in this case, you'll see that this is PBI, yes. So this is your Scrum template. It just works on remaining hours. We're not too concerned about the time that has lapsed. We're only concerned about the time remaining, and I'll tell you a bit more about that just now. The Agile template actually has two additional fields, original estimate and actual, for reporting purposes, but this is the important field, this remaining work. So if I say 6 hours remaining, this is not showing. I think this one. That's pretty much how burn downs look, quite indicative, right? There we go. As unrealistic as that burn down is, but anyway. So you'll see as we go across that remaining hours, this is an Agile template. So no, sorry, it's a Scrum template, so it still doesn't have. Anyway, what was I saying? Yes. So the remaining hours here, if I say 6, as we move across in progress, I can go and reduce this, do 3 stand-up type of things. In the mornings you do stand-ups. As you're busy developing and you're updating it, you'll do it, and then as soon as you move it here, it will automatically get removed to 0, and then you're back on schedule. The idea behind these things are that the tasks, just like your user stories, they get broken down into the granularity of being able to be completed in a sprint or an iteration. If it's bigger than that, you break it down into smaller stories. And then you move the story into a feature or an epic, and then you break it down. The tasks, same approach. You want to keep it as granular as possible, generally speaking in under a day. So it needs to be small, granular, add a table, add a view, add a field to a view, that kind of stuff. And the reason for that is so that it is trackable. Interesting. And we use the burn down for it. So you want to see the churn, you want to see if there's an issue, if we're falling behind, if we're not able to complete, we want to see it as soon as possible so we can actually do something about it. Then we can go and have a look and see if it's a requirements issue, if it's a training issue, if it's something outside of our control, or if it's inside our control, what we can do with it. If it is issues and stuff that's coming up, like bugs that we haven't catered for, then we need to reduce the backlog for the sprint and move things on to the next so that we can at least deliver something. The storyboard for the work items is slightly different to the Kanban board. So we've got the user stories on the side here. We can actually see it by user story or by person. These columns are directly related to the statuses of the task. So it's not like the Kanban board where we can add columns and move them across. This is actually, you need to do some fancy footwork in the background to get these columns to show, but you'll see that if I go here, they are directly related to these statuses. Okay, is there any questions around that? How does it tie into it? So the short answer is no. There is a extension, a team calendar extension, but that basically just shows iterations, and you can add important dates like holidays and you know, delivery dates and that kind of stuff. You must realize that TFS is just basically on that point, is a work management system. It's not a resource management system. So this looks at work, at what is left to be done, the requirements, and it's happy to manage that and assign it to people and so forth and so forth. But there's very little in here that will manage you as a resource. So if you look at your project server, I think it's still called project server, where it is actually resource management, which projects are you working on, that kind of stuff. That said, we've got this concept of capacity. Let's go to sprint 6. So we've got some insight into resource management, this idea of capacity. This is sort of one of those things that some people swear by and other people hate with a passion, but I can go and add the individuals. I can say how many hours they've got per day assigned to them in different disciplines, so whatever the case may be. If I do this and I go and have a look at my task board, yeah, work details, that gets surfaced over there. So now I can see this person has 95 hours available. As a team, we've got so many hours available, and if I go and schedule this to him, you'll see I'm busy assigning work to him. And obviously if we did that, we should see that we are now oversubscribed, so now we need to go and manage or massage or work more after hours or whatever the case may be. But that's as far as the resource management goes in this. Yeah. there any questions around that? Yes.
I've got a different question. I just wanted to know, what is the relationship between work item and sprint? Are they two related?
So the relationship between a work item and a work item exists in a sprint. So you'll see one of the key things in TFS is like what I mentioned earlier, is this whole integrated notion. So if I have a look at my work item, there's a bunch of links. So I can associate stuff to the work item and the work item to stuff. Okay. So I'll go through just now when we start talking about version control and that kind of stuff. So I can show you actual commits happening to the repository, and that it actually shows up as a link to my work item, so I can see the commits associated to this work item, what actually changed for me to implement this work item, stuff like that. I can associate work item to work item. So if I go and say this, you can see, let's do a couple of associations. So I've got parent, child, duplication, predecessor, successor. If you're looking at your Kanban type, your Gantt chart type things in MS Project, reference by test cases and so forth. So there's context between the relationships. Okay, that said, the iteration and area is an attribute on my work item. So you'll see there that this work item is assigned to sprint 6 in an iteration. This iteration path, so this actually brings me to this concept of teams. Let's have a look at iterations. There we set them up. So we've got two concepts here, iterations and areas. An iteration is a chronological grouping of work. So start date, end date, stuff exists in there. The area is a logical grouping. So it's just sort of a bucket of stuff. These things, you can have hierarchies. I've seen vast and numerous horrific things here. But if I want to say it's 1.1, and I can set up start and end dates, close. You can see this is now a sub-item of that kind of stuff, you know. So how I structure this is pretty much up to me, but as with anything, keep it simple. And it is a huge anti-pattern to have 2 or 3 different teams inside a team project following different sprint cycles. You don't want to do that. That causes headaches like nothing before. Anyway, that's your sprint. Areas, like I said, just a logical grouping of work. Now, if I go and have a look at my board, so if I say you'll see here I'm in a team, Parts Unlimited team. If I go and have a look at my teams here, you'll see that that is the default team. So there it is. That is set as the default team. So if I go and have a look at that team setup, come on. Where's my iterations? These are the iterations that in that team I'm interested in. So I've got the iteration areas and iteration setup. In the team context, I'm interested in those iterations. And in my area context, see, I'm interested in the default path there. And this should actually be include sub-areas, but anyway, I'm interested in that. So I'll see all the work associated in that part. That means if I go and let's take the bug. It's a nice visible one. And I move this out to, come on. a different area path, that bug has vanished off of my backlog because I'm not interested in it based on my settings over here. Now if I had set include sub areas, then it would show, but if you remember, my area path is structured like that. So I've got the root, and then under there I've got pool and pool DB area path. Okay, so I've moved an item out of that path into that path, and as we saw, the default team is no longer interested in it. Now if I change my context to a team other than the default team, which should be this one, come on. There we go. So this is the backlog for that pool team, and you'll see it's only got one item on their backlog. So this is that team context that you set up. Does that make sense? So areas, iterations, iteration is a chronological grouping, so sprints or iterations, whatever your terminology. Area is a logical grouping. We use those structures to define context within a team. So as a team sitting in this pool team, I'm only interested in that bug, so that's all I see. That's all I care about. Even though the backlog might be hundreds of items, I'm not really concerned by those. I'm just interested in that. And that will filter through onto our task boards, onto our reporting from, you know, your velocity and your burn down and your cumulative flows and all that kind of stuff as well within the team context.
Can you create one team that is shared between team projects?
One team.
So let's say, for example, you have a testing team.
Yeah.
You've got two separate projects, but unfortunately this testing team has both projects. Would you be able to create one team and share them on two projects, so they got in the two projects, one testing task, two testing tasks, something like that?
So you're basically asking if you've got one team and you can have multiple projects and a team be associated to multiple projects. So this comes back to that whole discussion of what is your backlog, what is the scope of your backlog. If you're managing those two projects on one backlog, then it becomes just you've got a team, and that team has a backlog, and you assign the work item. So it might be one project, it might be 10 different projects. If they're managed on one backlog, you can just assign them into the team, and that's what they see and that's what they do. If it is a discussion of different team projects within the TFS or Azure DevOps context, then basically no, you'd have to replicate them, and then the context would change because you've got this boundary of the team project. They would need to move into a different team project to be able to see that. You can set up queries that spans across, and you can set up the analytics that spans across the team projects, but your structures like your backlogs and your Kanban boards and that kind of stuff do not adhere to that. And even Excel doesn't like different team projects. But like I said, that's why you then scope your team project to include those projects, because now you are actually wanting to manage them on one backlog, because you don't want a team with a capacity of 20 have 20 capacity, and then have another project with another 20, so they've actually got 40, but they've only got 20 capacity. So you actually want to manage it across.
I'm thinking the problem that a lot of companies face when you haven't run the test much yet, because testing is a lot developer handle. But a lot of the times your testers really don't just work on one project, whatever you want to call it. So they have to context switch the whole time between project teams then to know where what work is for them, and that would be that what they have to do.
Really enjoyed that idea. That everything switching between projects. We try not to do it.
Yeah. So I actually I've done it a few times in companies, and I can actually tell you about the gains in it. A tester, so from a development point of view, you work in this context of a team. And if you're going to look at the Scrum guide, the Scrum definition, a team is anyone and everyone required to be able to deliver the product. And your testers are actually part of your team. So I've actually done this, like I said, a few times, and it works pretty well in that your testers intimately involved in your development. Before your developer actually tests or commits code or checks in code, the tester will come and sit with the developer and run through what they've done. That's your first interaction. And then obviously unit tests and integration and whatnot later. But just by taking that notion of taking stuff and throwing it over the wall to a tester, to the tester sitting next to the developer, you'd be surprised at the amount of effort, amount of time you gain by doing that. Yeah. But yeah, quite an anti-pattern to throw it over the wall to say, their testers go test. Okay. Is there any other questions? Okay, so we spent a lot of time so we spent a lot of time getting work into here. Let's go to my backlogs. Getting stuff in here, work items, creating new work items, putting them on the backlogs. Obviously adding new work items, there's bits and pieces all over the show if you're using Excel or MS Project or just directly out of here or on your backlog. There's a lot of shortcuts, a lot of different areas that you can add new work. I think it's time for a break. Okay, so you see add new work items, so you can add them all over the show. We've seen now the backlogs and sprints. We can go and actually in here, so you can already off of your backlog just go and manipulate and add tasks and test cases and manage them in here, move to iterations, create new branch if you want to get to that a bit later. But sprints, we've seen some stuff. Come on. What's the time now? Come on. 15 minutes. It's not do or die yet. Anyway. I'll reboot you now. Okay. Don't even have anything on the backlog. So, getting stuff in there, not too much of a problem. To get stuff out of here, okay, there's a couple of ways on reporting on how we want to see the stuff in here and how we want to collate and manage the work that's being managed within TFS. So the first port of call is our queries. Obviously, like I said, you've got your backlogs, you've got your Kanban boards, you've got your storyboards, so you've got the visual flow and visual aspect thereof. The next level on top of that is your queries. And your queries is very much SQL-esque in nature. So we can sit and watch a, there we go. So let's pick one. Let's say user store. Well, first of all, there's two areas for queries to exist in. There's what we call my queries, and then there's shared queries. My queries just simply, they are associated to me. So no one else can see them unless I explicitly give them rights or move them to a shared queries. Shared queries, this is what the team can see. So everyone that is working in this team project can see these queries. Now if I can have a look at a query, it's fairly, what? Lost. Editor, it's fairly straightforward from a querying point of view. We can have three different kinds of queries. So in this case, you'll see there's a flat list of items. So select X from Y kind of thing. The clauses, we can have pretty much all the fields that we've seen on these work items. We've got some, let's say, we've got some operators, so in, under, equal to, smaller than, greater than. And then we've also got some macros that we can use to associate to the values. So in this case, because I'm querying an iteration path, it's clever enough to say what you're looking for, and I can actually have what I said, the macro there. So at current iteration, that will look at my current iteration. So before that, that's actually a relatively new thing. It came about a year ago. Before that, you had to go and update your queries every iteration to say, now I'm interested in this iteration. So now we can actually have a query that just simply says, give me the current iteration. And because our iteration works off of start and end date, it will go and have a look at the first one that it can find that matches your dates, and then it will give you that back. Okay? So if you've got multiple queries, each with the same start and end date, it will find the first one and then that's it, type of thing. There's the iteration path, there's the assigned to, which there's the me at me. So in the context of the person looking at this, we'll go and find all the items assigned to him or her. Okay, so if I set it for me, it will show all the items that comes up for me, but if someone else looks at the same query, it will come up for them. And then let's say create date is the other one. Your date, date operators. There's an at today. And as with your iteration, if I say -7, that will give me all the items that were created in the last 7 days, for example. Okay, so not that this should give us much. Oh, no. Anyway. There's a couple of things, so you can actually group clauses and or type of thing. Okay, so that's a flat list of items. Then we've got items and direct links. So if you're looking at a parent-child relationship, so if I select that, you'll be able to see, in this case, give me all the product backlog items and all these that have children. So when this does return, this will give me all the product backlog items, and in this case just tasks, these that have tasks associated to them, which is a total of 1. This is a nice way if you have a look, for example, tested by. If you run this, so this should give you all the user stories that have test cases associated to them. Or, if you really want to be funny, you say, give me all the items that do not have any test cases associated to them. So now you can see all the items that are not being tested in your system. Okay, so that is list, work items, direct links, and then there's just hierarchical queries. So this will give you epics with their children features, with their children user stories, with their children tasks, etc., till the nth degree. Okay. So yeah, you can parent-child, for example. Okay, so backlogs, queries. This obviously filters through to Excel, so we can open up these queries in Excel. Now, Excel has this funny thing where it doesn't understand hierarchical queries, so it will tell you if you've got multiple levels or hierarchies, it will actually tell you title 1, title 2, and it will sort of know how to associate them. It's a bit clunky, but that's Excel for you. Then we've got some other structures. I mentioned analytics earlier. So analytics is an extension that you'll go and add into your organization. And this actually sets up quite a bit of structure, or quite a bit of infrastructure in the back end. So if you're going to have a look at the database, it's a whole bunch of queries, tables that it's actually populating off of your data. And here we can go and set up views. And these views, let's say, name, you can select context, you can select information from teams or projects, you can add different fields, and you can also set up filtering criteria. Just like okay. The nice thing about this, so there's your fields, is your history. So we can actually pull out for the first time in a while historical information. So we can see how things change over time. There's been one or two ways of being able to see it, but not very many. This is probably the best longer term situation. Just getting back to queries, we've got this idea of charts. Now, the difference between analytics and queries is that the queries is current, okay? Current information. I can go and create a chart off of a query. The chart is a very flat, very sort of one-dimensional little way of showing the information. Actually, get a nicer query. Like I'm like 2 steps ahead of the system. Oh, just that little tab there, that gives you the ability to query across team projects. So you can actually pull from different team projects via queries. But that's pretty much all of it. So if I go back to charts and I go and create a new chart, so fairly lightweight, sort of one-dimensional visualization of the query information. So I can say, give me a breakdown of all the items in their different states. Phew, finally. I can go and say, this is always a fun one. I think it's this one. So there we can see who's busy with what and what state they are. So I can create these charts on the query. I can create multiple charts on a single query, so different ways of visualizing. And then what I can do, if this is in a shared queries, the query is in shared query, is a shared query, I can take this guy and I can pin it to a dashboard. So there's my chart on my dashboard. Okay, and then finally there is another extension called plans, and plans just gives you sort of a very high level overview. I actually don't think there's another plan set up, and a plan will just give you sort of from a timeline point of view where the work items are scheduled. It is based off of the sprint here. So if I say new plan, so yes, backlog items. See if this will actually show you. So there you go. So you've got the dates across the top. You've got where these items have been scheduled into. If you move a bit back, you should see previous sprints, previous iterations, and you can also go and add points in time. Oh, come on. Anyway, when this comes back, oh, there we go. You can add points in time, so you can actually have like a deployment date. And we can say, there, make it red. Boom. And it'll just show up as a marker. Not that that means much. Okay, so this was all about an introduction. This was covering the backlog, grooming, product backlog items, planning sprints, having a look at some of the reporting structures, queries, that kind of thing. Any questions? Time for coffee. Shall we take 15 minutes break? Be back at 1:15.
Work items,
Mm.
right? Maybe like that. Right, we should do online.
hierdie hierso. So so dit is jou contextualization soort van area, want wat dit vir jou gee is vir al die items wat geassosieer is aan jou, aan wat jy follow, waarna jy kyk en daai tipe goed.
Maar dit maak dit chaos, want dis jou
Ja,
picture features, jou tasks,
jy kan sien daarso
alles tussen mekaar.
assigned to me following mentioned activities, daai tipe goed.
Want ek het nou vir 'n projek aan my besig gesit, ek backboard en ek create videos in plaas van ons live tab sodat mense net die
Hulle doen dit nou 'n paar plekke. So as jy eintlik nie eens hier nie. As jy kyk na dan kyk jy een oop hierso. Was my activity so. Daarso.
ek het daai gesien.
Selfde konsep. So ook pull request, work items, favorites, daai
En hy
tipe
sal
goed.
exclude dit van closed, né? Mense so gaan op.
Ja, hy behoort te.
Okay, listen, but eerlik vir ons vir lunch.
Ek
Enige preference?
glad nie.